Assalamu alaikum. This is a lecture about different ethics that should be followed during lab work by the students of biotechnology in order to be safe and efficient. First of all, you must know the hazard. So what is hazard? Hazard is any source of potential damage that can occur when you are working in a lab. So if you know the hazard, then only then you can adopt different protective measures to avoid that hazard. So the main thing is you must know the hazard, and then you should adopt different protection practices against that. Uh, Hazard can be of different types. Like if you are using a knife, there is a hazard of cut. If you are working with electric appliances, there is a hazard of electric shock. And if you are working on a wet floor, there is a hazard of slip. There might be health hazards, like if you are working with chemicals, the chemicals can involve different type of hazards. Like some chemicals are toxic, some are corrosive, as well as mutagenic, flammable, and radioactive. And if you are working with some biological organisms, then you have the biohazards. Like microorganisms can be non-pathogenic to very pathogenic. So if you know the hazard involved by different microorganisms, only then you can uh, adopt different measures. So there might be some physical hazards like the fire explosion in the lab. These can damage yourself physically. So, a corrosive hazard, what does it mean? Corrosive mean a hazard that may damage your skin, eyes, or other body parts when you are in direct contact with that. So that damage can be of to your living tissues at the site of contact. And one example of these type of chemicals is sulfuric acid. There might be some toxic substances, and these can damage your living organism and cause injury. For example, tetraethyl lead, that is a systemic poison, and also selenium, arsenic, and aflatoxins. These are also different examples of toxic substances. Hazards and be of another type, that is biohazard. Biohazard mean the hazard that is posed by biological organisms like microorganisms. So if you are working with microorganisms, uh, you should follow the appropriate measures to deal with different types of microorganisms. Like if you are working with biosafety level 1 microorganisms, then you need less protection measures. And if you are working with biosafety level 4 microorganisms, then you need very intensive protection against that. Hazards can be radioactive. Radioactive hazards are the very dangerous type of biohazards because they are carcinogenic, and that is why you should be very careful using these type of chemicals. There are different terms used with reference to different hazards. Like for carcinogenic hazards, carcinogens are term is used, and for the hazards to the developing fetus, teratogens is used, and for the mutagenic hazards, mutagens term is used, and for the allergic hazards, there is a term that is used, that is sensitizers. These are different signs given to different hazards, and you as a student of biotechnology, you must be very well aware of these signs. uh, for example, for flammable, hazards, there should be a sign like that. And for corrosive and for toxic and also for explosive and radioactive. So there are specific signs for specific hazards, and you must be familiar with these signs. And in fact, these signs are pasted on the bottles of chemicals in your lab. When it comes lab safety, so that is the responsibility of everyone. Everyone is responsible for that before starting work. So you must be very well familiar with all procedures or equipments you are going to use, and with all chemical, their hazards. You are working with that. And if you are not familiar, then you must get training first by your lab supervisors, and then you should start your work. There are some general safety practices when you are working in the lab, uh, like wearing lab coats. So that is very necessary in order to be safe um, um, by different chemical exposures. And your shoes should be fully covering your part, and also you should avoid loose clothing, jewelry, and if you have long hair, you must tie back them. And for the eye, skin and hand protection, you must adopt protective measures because these are very sensitive parts. And another thing is that you should not wear lab coats and your gloves outside the lab, because in that way you would contaminate the environment, and you can um, be a source of spreading contamination outside your lab. So for the protection of eyes, you can use different goggles, and for the protection of hands, you can use different gloves, especially against corrosive chemicals. When you are working in the lab, there are some general practices you must follow, like you must keep your hands away from your eyes, mouth, and other body parts while using different chemicals, because in that way you might contaminate your body. And you should wash your hands after you are done with your work. Never touch, taste, or smell any chemical in the lab. And your food and drinks should not be consumed in the lab. That should be outside the lab and after you are done with your lab. And also do not store your food and drink items in the lab refrigerators, because they have contaminations. While you are working in the lab, you should not do pipetting by your mouth. So use mechanical transfer devices for that. And be careful, yeah, that always handle the unknown things as hazardous. Avoid working alone in the lab, because if you get some accident, then there should be somebody to give you some help, at least the first aid. So and also do not use cell phones or headphones in the lab, because in that way you would get detract, and that can increase the potential for an accident to be occurred. And also another thing is that your phone or headphone, they may get contaminated with your hazardous material. You are working with that. When you are working in the lab, uh, there is an intense care is needed while working with glassware. You must rinse all your glassware after you have used, and decontaminate that if you have used biological material in that before it is sent to glassware washing. And if there is some shops in the glassware, then it must be removed before it go to the glassware bins. There are some other housekeeping practices needed in the lab. Your work area must be very clean and free of all unnecessary things. Do not touch any equipment with contaminated gloves. Anything with biomaterial on it must be disposed of in the labeled biohazard containers, and clean all glassware, labware equipment at the end of the day, and also return all equipment and supplies to the proper storage area at the end of the day. While working in the lab, do not hide any accident. Always report all accidents to the lab supervisors. Another thing is that you must know the first aid practices, because if you or your fellow get some accident, then you should have some knowledge how to deal with that. Because if you, for example, um, if somebody get burns, then you should know that that must be immediately flushed with cold water. And if somebody get some cuts, then that should not be dealt with without safety gloves. And you should try to stop bleeding as soon as possible by applying cold compresses on bruises, and that would stop swelling also. And if somebody is fainting, then you must provide him fresh air and lower his head than the rest of the body. And if somebody got something in his or her eyes, then his eyes must be immediately flushed with plenty of water for several minutes, and do not rub eyes. And if somebody get electric shock, then immediately you should shut off the electric appliances and remove the wire with the rubber glove, and report to the lab technician immediately. In the end, when you are going to leave the lab, you should turn off all gas, water, and heating apparatus you are working with, and you should waste all material that need to be disposed of, and decontaminate your work area and equipments, and return the unused equipment to the storage. Wash your hand with some detergent or sanitizer, and if there is something that need to be working overnight, that should be set properly. So these were some general practices or ethics necessary for a student of biotechnology to be followed while working in the lab.